Thank you for joining us for this month's Vertical IQ Industry Focus, where we look into detail at various sectors of the national economy, highlighting those industries that are doing well and those where the reality is less bright. Industry Focus is presented by Vertical IQ's chief economist, Ingo Windsor. Ingo was the founder of Local Market Monitor, is a graduate of MIT and Boston University, and he's not your typical economist. He presents data from a very practical business perspective and doesn't mind avoiding cautious conclusions. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Ingo.
Thank you very much, Julie. Every month we look at, pardon me, every month we look at industries in a specific sector of the U.S. economy, how they're doing, and how they may be affected by current developments. This month, pardon me, there we go. Hang on a second. There we go. This month, our focus is on the manufacturing sector, which provides 8% of the jobs in the economy and which has changed enormously in past decades. 60 years ago, when the U.S. had the only economy not destroyed by World War II, manufacturing provided a third of all U.S. jobs and produced a huge volume of goods that other countries needed. But as manufacturing recovered in the rest of the world, often with newer factories and better technology, U.S. dominance steadily eroded. And with cheaper transportation by container ships, a lot of the labor-intensive manufacturing in the U.S., like clothes and shoes, also moved abroad. Here's a picture of U.S. manufacturing activity in recent years. This chart shows the level of manufacturing production each quarter since 2020, with a quick recovery from the pandemic and only small ups and downs since then. The activity is fairly steady because most manufacturers now mainly produce goods for the U.S. market, which isn't growing very much, and they only export goods with complex technology like airplanes, machinery, and electronics. With the domestic market so important, let's now see how the U.S. economy is doing. I think the best way to judge the health of the economy is to look at the rate at which it's creating jobs. Jobs mean consumers, and consumers are the U.S. economy. Here's a picture of total job growth in the U.S. in the last 2 years, showing the increase in jobs each month compared to the same month of the previous year. Growth has been slowing for a while, and in almost all sectors of the economy. Job growth has come to a halt in the construction sector, especially in the large home building segment. A lot of U.S. manufacturers make construction materials. Growth is negative in the finance sector and in retail. Restaurants are providing some new jobs, and the large healthcare sector has produced jobs at a high rate. But there's been no growth in the big business services sector that often measures actual business activity. And there have been big job losses in the government sector, partly because 300,000 jobs have been cut at the federal level. With this rather dismal overview in mind, let's get to our industry focus. Here's the overall view of job growth in the manufacturing sector. With job losses spread throughout the economy, it's no wonder that manufacturers have been hard hit as well. It's important to note that these days, the number of jobs in manufacturing tracks very closely with actual production output. Computers and other forms of automation doubled labor productivity between 1990 and 2010. You can make the same amount of product with just half the number of workers, but there has been no increase since then. So jobs actually measure output. Although the overall manufacturer situation isn't good, there are a lot of differences within the sector. So let's review some of the most important manufacturing segments. Here's the situation for manufacturers of agricultural and construction equipment who have a large export business that has been heavily affected by trade disputes. Although the finished product is made by big companies like Caterpillar and John Deere, most of the parts are made by a large network of smaller manufacturers. It's difficult to separate underlying demand from the effect of trade wars, but U.S. exports of agricultural and construction equipment in 2025 were down 18% from 2023. In aerospace production, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and RTX, the former Raytheon, also provide work for a large group of suppliers and have a large export business that is often cyclical. Aerospace export in 2025 were up 35% from 2023. Another business sharply affected by trade disputes is the large network of car parts manufacturers. A complicating factor here is that the U.S. operations of foreign car makers like Toyota and Mercedes import parts, and the Canadian and Mexican operations of U.S. car makers import parts to the U.S. Trade problems also affect the manufacturers of computer components like semiconductors, capacitors, and circuit boards. Although exports in 2025 were up 26% from 2023, recent activity is down sharply. Chicken processors, on the other hand, produce mainly for the domestic market and right now benefit from high prices for beef. Demand for most food products is affected by their price. Here we see the total increase in U.S. food prices since the start of 2020. Shortages during the pandemic pushed up prices for many food products, causing consumers to buy less of some and to switch to cheaper alternatives, such as more chicken for beef. Food prices today are 33% higher than in 2020. And although the increase has slowed, what worries many consumers is that prices have not come down. Domestic demand is most important for commercial and retail bakeries, where higher costs of flour and energy have cut demand. And for manufacturers of beverages like soft drinks, beers, and wines. Makers of dairy products like cheeses and yogurts have recently seen strong demand. Getting back to industrial products, makers of basic chemicals that are used to make a wide range of other products have seen a drop in demand. Overall production of plastic products has decreased as lower home building activity has cut demand for plastic pipe and foam insulation. But makers of pharmaceuticals, especially diagnostic and biological products, have increased activity. The manufacture of metal products like structural beams and other building components has been boosted, both by construction of industrial buildings and by protective tariffs on steel imports. Tariffs also have boosted the manufacture of electrical equipment like transformers, motors, and generators. The manufacture of HVAC equipment, on the other hand, seems to be tapering off after a surge of production, possibly connected with the expansion of data centers. A review of various manufacturing segments here illustrates 3 points that can affect any U.S. manufacturer. First, that most U.S. manufacturing is for the U.S. market and is therefore tied to the health of the U.S. economy, which is slowing. Second, that manufacturers of food products usually have a more stable business than those who produce for a more specialized market like construction, but that food prices can affect demand very sharply. And third, that manufacturers with a significant export business or with import competition now operate in a much more difficult environment. That's it. In this time of uncertainty, it's important for bankers and investors to stay on top of developments that affect the fortunes of their customers. Vertical IQ provides the data and analysis they need with detailed industry profiles in 330 metro markets. Thanks very much for following along. This is our Vertical IQ Industry Focus. I'm Ingo Windsor.